4 races. That is all it took. 4 races into the biggest rule change in the history of Formula One, and the people who built it were already quietly drawing up the escape plan. Think about how insane that is. They spent years on this. They tore up the engines, the aero, the cars, the whole identity of the sport. They told us it was the future. And before the season was even a quarter old, the president of the FIA stood in Miami and started talking about bringing back the V8. So let's ask the question nobody in the paddock wants to answer out loud. If the 2026 rules are so good, why is everyone already trying to get rid of them? This is the story of how F1 changed everything, swore it was progress, and then spent the season quietly admitting it might have broken the thing it was trying to save. Nobody will say the word mistake. So let's say it for them, and let's actually look at the evidence. Start with the promise, because the promise was genuinely beautiful. F1 looked at the future and saw electric. Car makers everywhere were swearing off petrol, so the sport built a power unit that was nearly half electric. A roughly 50-50 split between the engine and the battery. The pitch was simple. Be greener. Be relevant. Run on sustainable fuel. And most importantly, attract new manufacturers who wanted to show off their electric tech. And on that last point, it worked. Audi came in. Cadillac arrived as an 11th team. Honda came back. Ford returned. On paper, F1 had never looked healthier. New names, new money, a grid bursting at the seams. So far, so good, right? Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because a Formula One car is not judged on paper. It is judged by how it races. And almost the moment these cars hit the track, the drivers, the people who actually sit in them, started saying things that should have terrified the sport. Let me give you their exact words, because you cannot make this up. Max Verstappen, 4-time world champion, called the new F1 Formula E on steroids. He called it Mario Kart. He said it wasn't fun. He called it anti-racing. He joked that he might as well swap his expensive simulator for a Nintendo. And then he stopped joking and started openly talking about walking away from the sport entirely. Charles Leclerc also reached for Mario Kart and said the way the car limits its own power was a bit silly. Fernando Alonso, a man who has seen everything, looked at 2026 and called it the Battery World Championship. And Christian Horner, before he left his Red Bull role, had warned them in advance that the whole concept could become a technical Frankenstein. When that many of the best drivers on the planet independently reach for the same insult, you do not have a public relations problem. You have a real problem. So what are they actually complaining about? You need to understand this because it is the heart of everything. The new cars are so dependent on electric power and the battery drains so fast that drivers cannot just go flat out. They have to constantly harvest energy back into the battery. And the way you do that is by lifting off the throttle early or downshifting to recharge. It is called lift and coast. And there is an even stranger version called clipping and super clipping, where the car basically runs out of electric punch on a straight and just stops pulling. Now, energy management has always existed in F1. Fuel saving, tire saving, all of it. Fans who tell you otherwise are kidding themselves. But here is the part that broke people's brains. This is happening in qualifying. In qualifying. The 1 hour of the weekend that is supposed to be pure, flat-out, no excuses speed. Drivers are now lifting off before corners they used to take with their eyes watering. Picture a car arriving at one of the great high-speed corners in the world. A corner that used to separate the brave from the rest. And instead of attacking it, the driver gently lifts off to save battery. One rider who grew up on Senna and Schumacher said watching it was genuinely disorienting. That word is doing a lot of work. Disorienting. As in, this does not look like the sport I love anymore. And then it stopped being just about the spectacle, and it got dangerous. At the Japanese Grand Prix, the young British driver Oliver Bearman came flying up behind Franco Colapinto's Alpine. Except Colapinto's car had gone into harvest mode mid-corner. It had, in effect, dropped anchor on the racing line. Bearman, on full power, closed in at something like 50 kilometers an hour faster than he could possibly react to. He crashed. He himself described the energy management around all this as annoying and sad. Sad. From the cockpit. So now ask yourself the harsh question. Is a sport safer or more dangerous when one car is flooring it and the car in front is invisibly slowing down to charge a battery, and no human being can predict the gap closing? The drivers were not asking that as a debate. They were living it. Now, to be fair, and we are going to be fair, there is another side. So let me steelman it properly, because the truth deserves better than a hit piece. The new cars are smaller, lighter, and more nimble. They can follow each other more closely, and the overtaking numbers genuinely jumped. The season-opening Australian Grand Prix saw around 125 overtakes. The same race the year before? Around 45. That is not a small bump. That is a different sport. And Lewis Hamilton, of all people, the most successful driver in history, said the Sunday racing was some of the best he had experienced in 20 years. So some people say, relax, this is just growing pains. Remember 2022? New rules, drivers complained, and then everyone adjusted. Give it time. That is a fair argument, and it might even be partly right. But here is the pushback, and this is the part nobody wants to sit with. More overtakes is not the same thing as better racing. If a pass happens because one driver outbraked another, that is racing. If a pass happens because the car in front simply ran out of battery and became a sitting duck, that is not racing. That is a software event. And if you have to ask whether the move you just watched was skill or just a depleted battery, then F1 has a problem that no overtaking statistic can fix. That is the uncomfortable core of it. The driver is supposed to be the hero of this story, and a lot of them are telling you, in plain language, that they feel less like racers and more like accountants managing a battery that decides how hard they are allowed to push. Now here is where the sport convicts itself, because if 2026 were really fine, you would expect F1 to stand by it. Instead, watch what they actually did. After just 3 races, the FIA called emergency meetings and rushed through changes. They cut how much energy you could harvest in qualifying. They cranked up the superclip power to make the battery refill faster. Patch after patch, mid-season, on rules they had spent years designing. And then they announced that over the next 2 seasons, they would shift the power balance back toward the petrol engine, away from the battery, the exact thing the drivers were begging for. Read that carefully. They built a nearly 50-50 hybrid, sold it as the future, and then immediately started dialing the electric part back down. When Verstappen was asked if the mid-season fixes were enough, he called them a tickle, barely a scratch on the real problem. And then came the part that gives the whole game away. The president of the FIA, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, stood up and said the V8 engine is coming back. Not a hybrid. Not this electric-heavy formula. A loud, simple, old-school V8, running on sustainable fuel, with barely any electric power at all. His words, and I am quoting him almost exactly because they are extraordinary. It's coming. Oh yes, it is coming. He is targeting 2030, and he made something brutally clear. If the manufacturers, the ones F1 bent over backwards to attract, do not vote for it, he will wait 1 more year and force it through anyway in 2031, with no vote needed at all. The F1 boss Stefano Domenicali backed him to the hilt, saying he supported the vision 1,000%, that lighter cars and V8s and sustainable fuel were the pure essence of motorsport. So let that land. The sport built a brand new electric-heavy era, and before that era had even finished its first season, its 2 most powerful men were on the record saying they want to tear it down and go back to the engines they ditched 12 years ago. That is not confidence. That is a sport sprinting for the exit of a building it just moved into. So we have to ask the biggest, ugliest question of all. Why? Why would anyone do this? Why blow up the entire formula for an electric future and then run away from it almost instantly? And the answer is the harshest truth in this whole video. Because it was never really about the racing. The 2026 rules were designed to chase the car industry. Back when these rules were drawn up, every major car maker was promising to go fully electric. They told F1 they would never build another petrol engine. So F1 redesigned itself in their image, to keep them happy, to keep the money flowing. And then the car industry quietly changed its mind. Electric sales cooled. Governments started softening their bans on petrol cars. The FIA's own regulations boss admitted, in plain terms, that the political landscape had changed and that the car makers who swore they were going all electric simply had not done it. So here is what actually happened, stripped of all the polish. Formula One mutilated its own product, the racing, the sound, the feeling, the thing millions of people fell in love with, to please a group of companies. And those companies then changed their plans. F1 was left holding a formula nobody in the cockpit seems to enjoy, built for a future that did not arrive on schedule. The drivers paid for it, the fans paid for it, and the sport is now using the industry's reversal as cover to do what some people wanted all along, which is to bring back the noise and rip out the batteries. And through all of it, you, the fan, were being told to smile. To toe the line that this is the most exciting era ever. While a four-time champion talked about quitting, while qualifying turned into a battery-saving puzzle, the official message stayed relentlessly positive. And a lot of people online stopped buying it. Scroll any F1 forum, and you will find the same exhausted argument on repeat. The believers insisting it is just growing pains, and the racing is closer than ever. The doubters asking why they are watching cars lift off in the corners that used to make their hair stand up. The quiet worry, underneath all of it, that some fans are simply drifting away while the sport insists everything is fine. So here is the honest version of 2026, the one the press releases will never give you. The grid is fuller than it has been in years, and the cars are harder to love than they have been in a generation. The overtaking went up, and the magic went down. The sport got greener, and the soul got quieter. And the people in charge, the ones who built this, answered the question for us without meaning to. Because you do not start planning your escape from a place you are happy to live in. So next time someone tells you 2026 is the best era of Formula One ever, ask them one simple thing. If it is so good, why is the sport already counting down the days until it can go back? 4 races. That is all it took for them to start running. Maybe the rest of us are just a little slower to admit what they already know.